Recently, we've seen a shift in how people view this game. It wasn't that long ago that I've seen so many people say this is the worst Souls game, as I'm sure all of you remember. All of a sudden, a lot of folks have come out of the shadows talking about how they actually enjoyed this game, with some people saying this might actually be their favorite out of the Souls series. Dark Souls 2 is actually my first Souls game, and at that time, I've never played any other game like this. I think the most recent discussion amongst the community is whether the original Dark Souls 2 is better than Scholars of the First Sin. And whatever your take is, at least in my opinion, the important stuff has stayed the same. Dark Souls 2 has a lot of bosses, and making this video has been a treat, but I do admit, there's a lot of misses in between all the great boss fights I remember. Now, before I start this list, I do want to point out there are going to be a lot of spoilers, so fair warning. Alright, let's get started. The Royal Rat Vanguard is, in my opinion, the worst boss fight in the game. Loyal servants to the Rat King, this Vanguard stands between you and the Royal Rat Covenant. Vanguard, in this scenario, stands for army, an army of rats, which is what we're up against. As soon as we enter the Fog Gate, we're met with a flurry of rats, and once we defeat enough of them, the boss fight starts. That's when you're met with the leader, which is just another rat. With spiky hair, I guess. No crazy moveset, no special animation, just another rat. Honestly, I'm not sure what they were going for here, and by this point in the game, assuming you took the suggested usual route, we probably fought our fair share of rats already. And with them thinking it was a good idea to give us some type of artificial difficulty with throwing out a bunch of them at the same time, I don't know, it doesn't sit too well with me, I guess. Now, I kinda get why the Dragon Riders were in the castle. If you read their soul description, it says that they were the faithful servants of King Vendrick. And I'll be honest with you, I like the first Dragon Rider boss that we encountered early in the game, but I feel like this boss doesn't do the game justice for how far into the story we're in. I feel like this fight gives us the same artificial difficulty that the Rat Vanguard gave us. If one is too easy, just throw two of them in there. It just feels lazy. And by this point in the game, this is where the Dragon Rider should have gone from boss to just another enemy, as other Dark Souls games have done in the past. Other than the Archer, the moveset is pretty much the same. The way you have to dodge your attack stays the same, nothing special here, which kinda sucks. Okay, you kind of get where I'm going with this. I just never think that reusing a boss is a good idea. Quality over quantity is always a better way to do things, and this is a good reason why. I get that this isn't exactly the same as the first giant boss we face, but I also don't think that swapping a club for a greatsword is different enough to warrant having to do this fight. Now, I will say this one is better than the Royal Rat Vanguard, but at least the rats were optional. This fight is necessary to complete the game. And I think what makes the fight worse is that it's pretty much at the tail end of the entire journey, which is where you'd expect things to get a bit crazier. I do like the whole memory thing. It tries to give you some context in a game where you have no idea what's happening, but the fight itself is just kind of boring. Prowling Magus does have some lore. Being a sorcerer hailing all the way from Aldia's Keep, it seems he was here to try and rule over the hollows in this land, and this boss fight is what we're left to deal with, Magus and his followers. This is for sure one of the easiest fights in the game, with it pretty much consisting of a mob of regular enemies other than Magus himself. Everyone in this room can be taken care of pretty quickly, especially with a weapon that has big swings. Magus does have some magic attacks that can surprise you if you're not paying attention, but other than that, it's just a standard mob fight. They all stagger pretty easily, so with enough stamina, you can clear the area within a minute. It's nothing noteworthy. The covetous demon soul states, eating is an expression of desire. There once was a man whose deep affections were unrequited. He transformed into the covetous demon, which only made him lonelier than before. For it was Mitha he was in love with. To covet means to desire, albeit it desiring something or someone that belongs to another. Who knows what this demon looked like before he decided to eat his feelings. All we know is he was an obstacle on our path. As far as the boss fight goes, it's pretty one-sided. Other than his random body slams or the occasional rolls to the side that he does, the fight is pretty tame. If you stay too close to his back, he does have a tail swipe, but most of the time, his side is the best area to stay. I think this boss was the best example of underwhelming based on the difficulty of the area. Even if it's your first time playing, the objective becomes obvious. When you see his skull and hands, you attack. When he closes his mouth, you back away. and then you rinse and repeat. His story is a bit unsettling. There isn't a clear explanation on where he's from. All we know is that he's imprisoned here in the Shrine of Amana, for having a desire to eat human flesh. He's even gone so far as to mimic the singing of the surrounding Milfanito in the area. When he's defeated, he even drops the key to the Embedded, for which it states that the Embedded also had a great temptation for human flesh. Coincidence? Probably not, but we don't really have more lore to go off of. This boss fight can either be a bit tricky or super simple, depending on how you go about it. The objective here is that there's 3 skeleton lords. Each lord is equipped with a scythe, a staff, and a halberd. Now, the difficulty isn't with them necessarily, but with the skeletons that get summoned once you defeat each of the lords. I think the best approach is to tackle one skeleton lord and the minions that follow at a time. If you try and defeat all of the lords at the same time, then you have a skeleton party that you have to deal with, and it's honestly a lot more annoying doing it this way. At least in my opinion, I think the hardest part of this fight is the bone wheel guys, especially if you have to deal with everything else at the same time. But patience is a virtue here for sure. Now, I didn't want to put the Ancient Dragon so low on this list since it's an optional boss, and unless you whack him a couple of times, you would have been none the wiser. Now, I'm a big fan of dragon bosses in Souls games, but this one didn't do it justice. I know he's ancient, but damn does it also move like it. It does have the typical Souls dragon moveset, which is stomping its feet, swiping its tail, and the most annoying fire breath attack that for some reason I never seem to clear enough distance to be out of the way. I think its story is a lot more interesting than the fight itself, for when you defeat it, it drops a soul of a giant. Now, I've seen some discussions on what this actually means. It could be that the ancient dragon was a giant all along, or it was manifested by someone by using the soul of an existing giant, or it could be that it defeated a giant and just had their soul in its pockets. Who knows, but it makes for interesting conversation. Now, I don't think this fight is terrible. I think we're starting to get on the side of bosses that I favor a bit. What's odd though, is his possession of one of the old one's souls. Is he the rightful owner of this soul, or did he just happen to stumble upon it? For his description, it says that he embraces all that has been rotten or tossed away. The Black Gulch is filled with things that have rotted away, and I don't think he's any different, other than the sheer power he's gained from being the owner of an old one's soul. As far as the fight goes, most of his moves are pretty easily telegraphed. There's a lot of big swings, which, depending on how high your agility stat is, could just be rolled through entirely. He does have a grab attack, but the windup is so long that you should have ample time to get away. The arena is filled with fire pits scattered throughout, and he can lace you with oil, so definitely be careful with that. Learning to dodge his big swings is the key for most of his fight, and has just enough difficulty to be considered engaging. Look, this fight's cool. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just not a fan of unwarranted callbacks. I know Dark Souls 3 had a lot of them, but at least they fit the narrative, unless I'm missing something here. I feel like FromSoft put him in here as an attempt to get some DS1 players hyped up. If you read his soul description, it literally states the old Dragon Slayer is reminiscent of a certain knight that appears in old legends, and that's it. Either they couldn't find a better way to fit him into the story, or they just straight up didn't have the right to. I don't know. I'm not trying to be too negative, it just makes me feel weird. And also, having Ornstein in this game without Smo, it just doesn't feel as good. The fight is definitely not as hard as when you had to fight both of them in the first game. Yin is missing Yang here, and it's pretty noticeable. Another callback. This fight's okay, but when I attempt it, I usually leave it for one of the last things in the game that I have to do. I know it's not the intended thing, but I also don't like fighting mobs if I don't have to, and getting the Bastille key by trying to fight them early enough just doesn't seem worth it to me. At the level I went into this fight though, it was at least more enjoyable. If you manage to separate yourself from the pack, fighting one at a time is always the best solution, but I feel like it never plays out that way. They do stagger just like DS1 gargoyles, so if you can manage that pretty well, you should be okay. I feel like everyone knows the gargoyles by now, so let's move on. The first time I fought Najka, it was surprising to say the least. You enter the fog gate and you just see her upper half, with the rest of her body covered in sand. She throws some spells your way, but other than that, it just seems like you're gonna wail on some helpless enemy trapped and unable to move. Now, with this being Dark Souls, of course that's not the case. After the first swing, she exposes what she truly is. Half human, half scorpion. Now, based on past history, you can tell FromSoft has had some clever ideas when making hybrid enemies, and this is no exception. The fight is pretty well telegraphed. There's some surprising attacks that even I can't read in time to avoid. It wasn't until my second playthrough that I started to explore the rest of the Shaded Woods. This is where you get the story of Nashka. If you venture deep enough, you encounter another scorpion hybrid named Tark, and with the Ring of Whispers, you can converse with him. He'll tell you that she's his wife, or betrothed, but she has gone mad over time. It's not explained why, or for how long. There's some subtle hints that he was created by Seath the Scaleless, or he did have a never-longing quest for knowledge. But other than that, any other reasons are beyond our comprehension. All we know is that he's ready to help us end our suffering. I thought this boss fight was kinda cool. Once you go in, it's just a couple of rats, which immediately become aggressive. I honestly thought that was the boss, kinda like the Vanguard fight. And then all of a sudden, you see the huge massive dog-like creature, which I think is supposed to be a rat, or maybe it's a dog that thinks it's a rat, I'm not sure. But he leaps down, and that's when you encounter the boss fight. This one does take a bit of strategy, since the smaller rats do some pretty heavy toxic buildup, and that does so much damage to you. But if you can take the rats out before the actual boss jumps down, it's not too hard of a battle. I don't think it does any crazy moves, mostly pawing at you, jumping around to get away from you. Nothing too crazy. Think Sif, but without a sword. Now, let me start off with this. If you have trouble with this boss, use a torch. It's a completely different fight without one. Freya was a spider owned by Duke Seldora, the founder of the Brightstone mining town that we're currently in at this point. He had a deep fascination with spiders which overtook this land. I'm assuming because of him, Freya found herself in possession of the writhing ruin, thus eventually turning her into the monster we face at this point. She's pretty much invincible, other than her two heads, one on each side of her body. She does have some annoying attacks, mostly due to her size, where she'll start stomping her legs, and depending on the camera angle, you'll have no idea where they're going to strike. Her web attacks and everything else, I'd say it's easily avoidable. If you don't enter this fight with a torch, all the other spiders will attack you as well. So you can do the torch strategy, or go in there and take all the small spiders out first, or you can just try to ignore them to see how far you go. I'm not that good at this game. I'd rather just use a torch. Ruin Sentinels are awesome. The first encounter takes you by surprise. As soon as you drop into the fight, the first one starts swinging. Now this boss fight does consist of fighting 3 of them, but the way they handled this mob fight I think was really good. You start with the first one on the ledge, and if you defeat them fast enough, you'll only have to deal with the remaining 2. If you think you found safety up on that ledge though, no way. They'll jump up there and start wailing on you if you let them. By this point in the fight, I'd say it's better just to drop since it's a wide open area and just learn their attacks. They mostly do the same attacks, and I think their AI works in a way that'll help you. It's not too hard to single each one out, or keep both of them in frame so you can dodge or block any incoming attacks. Playing this with some agility points helps out a lot since they do some pretty big swings. This is the first mob fight you encounter, and I definitely died a handful of times, but it never felt cheap or unbalanced. The Flexile Sentry is in charge of No Man's Wharf, specifically the ship that we fight it in. It's the task of this boss to send the undead to the Lost Bastille, where they will be imprisoned forever. Now, although there's different ways of getting to the Lost Bastille, this is the intended way, so it seems. There's 2 sides to this boss, the dual-wielding club side and the dual-wielding sword side. This adds some variety to the boss depending on which side you're in at the moment. I definitely think the club side is easier, as the attacks take a lot longer for their animations, which gives you more time to dodge or deflect. I've seen a lot of people say that the ship starts to fill up with water, which eventually kills you, but I've never encountered that issue. I'm assuming you have to stand there for like a really long time to actually have that happen. Also, use a pole in the middle of the arena to separate yourself from him if you need to heal or get some distance. Okay, I love and hate this boss. I think it's a cool design, and the attacks are well paced, but this arena is annoying. Having a constant poison buildup from the arena alone is a poor design choice, I think. Now, I'm lucky enough to know how to take the poison off, but there's no indicator on how you're supposed to do that. If you get to the windmill right next to the bonfire, you can burn it, but unless you have a torch, there's nothing that tells you that this can be interacted with. It'd be nice if it had some type of message that told you need to burn it or something. I get it. It's Dark Souls and no help is the best help, but this is kinda dumb. As far as the boss fight, there's no one-shot attacks, there's nothing cheap. She has a grab attack, but it'll take half of your health at the most, which isn't too bad. Her melee attacks can be easily avoided with some practice, and if you take time and manage your stamina, it's a pretty enjoyable fight overall. As far as her lore, I think it's interesting. She used to be beautiful, she was engaged to a prince, but when he cheated on her, it drove her mad. And in an attempt to reach a certain beauty, she consumed poison from Earthen Peak. I don't know who gave her this information, but they were clearly wrong. She ended up looking like this, and that sucks. Old Iron King is not a hard fight, but it's so badass. So far, we haven't seen any creatures this huge in size, and the sheer sight of being next to a demon this big is just a sight to behold. He actually used to be the prince that Mytha was in love with, but his mind, becoming twisted by becoming a hollow himself, led to him eventually turning into this monstrosity. His attacks are pretty easily avoidable, you just have to know where he's gonna hit, then dodging off to the side. His melee attacks leave you with a lot of time to attack him, and you can just as easily run away from his fire breath. He does have a lot of HP, but most of the fight is just rinse and repeat. If he does manage to hit you with any of his attacks, it is pretty dangerous, but with enough practice, it's super rewarding. The Lost Sinner would test your skills. This is one of the earlier bosses I had trouble with for sure. Lighting her area didn't do much for me, so most of the time I fight her in the darkness, which isn't really that dark anyways. I think the only thing that lighting the room does is keep the lock on when she does something crazy and gets out of your view. If you have a heavy weapon, this one doesn't give you too much time to attack. Sinner evades a lot and will also try to attack you as soon as you try to attack her. This is a fight that just feels good to get done, and getting an old soul out of it feels pretty good too. By this point in the game, it makes sense to have a BS double boss, and I can't be too mad. This feels like the ultimate skill check, more of stamina and health balancing than just overall damage that you deal. If you get lucky, you can single one out, but the best way to handle them is to deal damage to them both. If you defeat one first, then the second one will try to revive the other one after a bit, so definitely keep that in mind. I think this one's fun, but I'm just not a huge fan of these fights, so I couldn't find it in me to put them higher on the list. Dragon Rider is cool. Dragon Rider is awesome. This boss is what someone that never played a Souls game would imagine a Souls boss to feel like. No dumb gimmick, no weird special effects or animation, just a straight to the point boss fight. Depending on which way you go, this is the first boss you encounter, and I think this is a great way to test a player before they venture deeper into the game. Everything opens up after this, so I always appreciate the linearity up to this point in the game. I love dragon fights. The Guardian Dragon might be one of the weaker ones of any Souls game, but it's still way better than Ancient Dragon. This is the first dragon boss, and he guards the way up to Dragon Eyrie, which is where you eventually find the Dragon Shrine. With us getting past Aldia's Keep, I had no clue that I'd be facing a dragon, so this was a pleasant surprise. Now, Souls games have never strayed far from changing their mechanics, so if you're used to their usual leg slams, you'll be fine. The one thing that can for sure get you though is the Fire Breath attack. It has a wide span, and unless you're 100% out of the way, it's gonna clip you, and it does some crazy damage. But it's a fun fight, I like this one. Executioner's Chariot is kinda grim. It's an extra boss that can be completely avoided if you wanted, but I think the premise is cool. The chariot isn't there for you. The purpose of the chariot is to constantly kill the skeletons in the area, where the mages will then resurrect, only to get trampled on again and again. You get it. This fight is pretty much us getting in the way of that torture. Now, unless you know how to start the boss fight, the gimmick is kind of annoying. You have to get all the way to the end, making sure you avoid the chariot and trying to stay alive in the process. There's skeletons all over the place, and if you kill them, they'll just come back. You have to also defeat the mages in the arena to make sure they don't respawn. And once you get to the end, you pull the gate closed and the boss fight starts. Once it starts, it's pretty easy. Definitely dodging is the best tactic, making sure you learn the moveset. If you get too far, it'll either charge at you or spit some dark magic stuff your way. I always tend to stay close and just dodge when necessary. Other than the beginning though, this boss is sick. The first encounter with the last giant is a memorable one. He's the first boss we encounter if we decide to go down the second of two first accessible locations. Not only is he one of the giants that laid waste to Drangleic, but he's arguably one of the strongest, according to his boss souls. Once you complete the game, you'll look back and say that he's definitely one of the easiest encounters, but you'll always have fun with this boss. His attacks are straightforward, and this is the best route to take if you're completely new to the franchise, as this boss will teach you what you need to know as far as defending yourself and where to find openings to counterattack. The run back if you die isn't too crazy either, with you going down a short set of steps and down an elevator and you're pretty much there. I think it's cool that he has a second phase where he rips off his arm and uses it as a makeshift club in a last-ditch effort to try and defeat you. Definitely worthy of starting my top 8. The Looking Glass knife fight is the closest that we're gonna get in this game to absolute cinema. The whole thing sends chills down my spine. The music is epic. You're fighting in the middle of a thunderstorm. There's rain pouring down. There's just so much going on at the same time. And I love that as soon as you enter the fog gate, the fight just immediately starts. There's no cutscene, just an epic battle. He doesn't hesitate to start either. You have to be ready as soon as you get in there. A lot of his attacks consist of big swings from his sword, some overhead attack combos, some side swings, all while keeping his entire left side shielded with his mirror. He does have a special lightning infused sword attack, but the windup is pretty huge. Usually you can just get out of the way. He also has some thrusts if you get too far away. Where the fight gets a bit more complicated is when he summons a shadow enemy from his mirror shield. That whole phase is awesome. It's definitely not as complicated as it seems, since Looking Glass Knight's a lot slower. Usually you can 1v1 the shadow enemy, then return to fight the boss after. During the second phase, he has some extra lightning-based special moves, but nothing extra crazy that can't be handled with enough practice. Velstad was always by King Vendrick's side. It seems that when the king went into the undead crypt, Velstad didn't hesitate to accompany him. He must have sworn an everlasting oath to always remain with him at all times, even in this hollow state that Vendrick found himself in. If we want to get to Vendrick, of course, Velstad's going to get in our way. Being a knight himself, he has all the attacks you would expect a knight to have. His moveset usually consists of overhead slam attacks, some combo swing attacks, and a lunge attack if you start to give him some distance. Once you deal enough damage, he buffs his weapon with dark magic, which hurts if his attacks actually manage to clip you. I feel like by this point though, we have enough experience to deal with most of his attacks. It's once you beat him though, that you start feeling that we're getting to the end. The Smelter Demon is its sole reason for the downfall of Iron Keep. It is the reason why the old Iron King became the demon that we faced. Who knows why or how this piece of iron armor got its hands on his soul. Maybe it was the Iron King himself that thought it might aid in his quest for power. This fight is super fun. I know it's a hate it or love it situation, but I love it. Getting to this boss is a whole other story, especially in the Scholars edition of the game, but the boss fight itself is great. It has some big swing combos, a jumping attack that most of the time is pretty easy to get away from. It's when his next phase starts, that's when it starts becoming a bit more of an issue. If you deal enough damage, eventually he'll engulf his chest in flames, dealing some passive fire damage if you get too close. There's definitely a lot of armor that should do pretty well in protecting you against this though. Other than that, same jumping attack he used on you earlier in the fight, he'll start doing it again, but this time, if you're in range, he'll cause an explosion. And if you get caught in it, it does some crazy damage. Not to mention his last phase, where he plunges his sword into his chest and imbues the whole sword with fire as well. This part isn't too much of a problem for me, since I like to dodge his attacks, but some shield-wielding players may have some trouble, as I'm sure blocking these attacks will still hurt you plenty. This boss is so cool that they thought it'd be a good idea to put it in the game like 7 more times throughout the journey. The first time you encounter it, it gets dropped onto the raised platform by a bird of some sort. As I'm sure most of you know by now, he's the actual pursuer we face later on as an actual boss. The first time I fought him, I was legitimately terrified of him. His stature and demeanor are just so imposing that you can't help but fear for your life. Once I learned how this game works with the agility system and iframes, I always make sure I start my games by dropping all my levels into adaptability, and once I get to the Pursuer, it's usually around level 15. Now let me tell you, this makes Dark Souls 2 a completely different game, and the best way to test your agility is with the Pursuer fight. All of a sudden, you can dodge his moves, and all his swings just start missing you when you dodge. I know for a lot of my friends, this is where they stop playing, which I'm assuming it's like that for a lot of people as well. But I tell you, once I figured this out and I was successful in defeating Pursuer by doing what I thought was right, dodging, and then having my dodges feel like all the other Souls games, it was such a good feeling. This is the first fight that makes you feel powerful enough to keep pushing through the game. And then when you encounter them like 5 or 6 more times throughout the game, it's always a good gauge at how far you've come from that first Pursuer fight. After defeating Velstad, now nothing is in our way. We know the king is in the next room, thus ending our journey to see what the king has been doing, why he decided to hide away in this crypt. This is what happens when you're faced with 2 choices. Link the fire to temporarily stop the curse, or let the flame die, where darkness could consume the world, and the age of undead can flourish. Vendrick, though, thought for so long there has to be a third option, for choosing either of these two would mean the end to the reign of his kingdom. But he waited so long that he could feel the curse hovering over him, knowing that the only way to get access to the throne of want, one would need his ring. He knew he would become a hollow soon, and it seemed that locking himself away from anybody that'd be able to reach him was the only way. This is his hollow self, once we get to him. The reason why I put this fight so high up on my list isn't because of the difficulty or how crazy the fight is. The fight is just different. There's nothing we gain but the peace we're giving to the king. Maybe he can finally rest. If he's undead, if he's hollow, how can he be at peace? We get his ring without fighting him. We can access the throne of want, but in defeating him, we broke him from his everlasting wonder. It's kind of crazy how hard to find this boss is, but thanks to the internet, it's not so bad anymore. It's still a pretty annoying set of tasks you have to do, but let me tell you, it's worth it. It kind of makes me mad to see that they buried this cool of a boss under a very extensive set of trials that are, in my opinion, the most missable in the game. A lot of his attacks are pretty easy to avoid, with his dark sword attack being the hardest in my opinion. It's a pretty average one-on-one fight, just getting out of the way of his dark and fire attacks. It's when he makes a clone of himself when the fight gets increasingly difficult. They do the same type of attacks, but since they fly, a lot of the time you have to really know when to dodge correctly. And if you get hit, it can very well one-shot you if you're not careful. What I appreciate a lot about this boss is that the clone also takes damage. It's not like one of those who's the real one, who's the fake one types of bosses. But whoever you're closer to, or the one that has the best opening at that time, that's the one to go for. I don't know if the reason why I love this boss is because I've never played him before, but this has to be one of the funnest and hardest bosses in the game. From the beginning, there was one thing that Chandra wanted: power. There were no bounds to her beauty, and she used this to help her achieve her ultimate goal at the time: become Queen of Drangleic, ruling alongside King Vendrick. But of course, having the Curse of Want, this was never going to be enough. That was when King Vendrick found out what she was truly after: the First Flame. This was the reason King Vendrick ran away. He knew that the only way to keep her from ultimate power was to sequester himself, for this was her true form. Once we get to the Throne of Want, and we have what it needs to gain access to it, she intercepts, congratulating us and attempting to take the throne for herself. This boss fight was cool the first time I fought it, but it's when you learn the lore of the story and how deep in history everything goes. That's when you start to put the puzzle pieces together, and you start to appreciate why you're here at the end, why you're fighting Nashandra. The world of Drangleic is the way it is because of her. She was left to rule the kingdom, but ultimately had no one left to rule over. This was the last piece that she needed, and the only way to get it was to defeat us, the player. Making this video was super fun. I do apologize if it felt like I was going in all sorts of directions with it. It's honestly my first video, so if there's anybody that made it to this part, let me know what you think. I want to make more videos like this, but I also want to get better. If you liked it, of course, leave me a like. If you hated it, tell me why. You know how it goes. All right, peace out.